Adapting vintage lenses to use on your modern mirrorless camera is one of the cheapest, easiest, and most powerful ways to transform the type of photos and videos that you're capturing. And I don't want you to think just because we're talking about this as a budget-friendly option that it means it's a lower quality option. I've got a lens here that you can buy on eBay or Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or maybe at a garage sale. You can pick it up for $50 or $60, and it was used in the shooting of one of the most recent Batman movies, a multi-million-dollar production. They didn't use a lens like this because they couldn't afford a better lens. They used it because it rendered the sort of images that they were looking for. And you can buy that same lens very cheaply and get the same sort of images. The other thing I want you to know about adapting vintage lenses is if you buy a vintage lens in good condition at a fair price, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you will be able to sell it for at least what you paid for it, probably more, because these lenses have reached their sort of minimum value. And because you can adapt these lenses to modern mirrorless cameras, and it's becoming more and more popular to do so, in general, over time, the prices are actually creeping up. So unlike buying a new lens, which instantly devalues when you take it out of the box, you buy one of these, the value is actually going up. So you can just think of it as a long-term loan. You buy a $50 lens. If 6 months from now you need that $50, you can sell it for $50 and get your money back. I think the one thing holding a lot of people back from adapting lenses to their mirrorless cameras is they don't understand what it is, how it works, or intimidated by the process. It's very, very simple. Let me just explain how this works and why this is even possible. This is an old film camera. And what you'll see with this camera is it has a mirror inside the camera that allows me to look through the viewfinder. It reflects off that mirror, and I can see the image that is coming through the lens into the camera. When I press the shutter release, that mirror flips out of the way, the film is exposed, and then the mirror flops back into place. And because of that, the body of this camera has to allow the space for that mirror to be in place and flip out of the way. With a mirrorless camera, what they've done is they have eliminated that mirror, and therefore they have eliminated the need for the lens to sit that far away from the actual film, or in this case, the sensor. So that means to make a lens like this focus properly on a mirrorless camera like this, we need an adapter that sits in the middle and puts that extra space in so that that lens is still sitting in the same position that it was on the camera that had the mirror in it. What this allows us to do with an adapter is it allows us to make adapters which are essentially just spacers that move the lens far enough out that it's in the right position to be able to gain focus. And on one end of the adapter, we put our modern mirrorless mount. And on the other end of the adapter, we put the vintage classic lens mount. So what we need to do when we are thinking about what mirrorless camera we've got and what vintage lenses we want to adapt, we need to know what the lens mount is on our mirrorless camera. And for example, Sony has E mount, Canon has RF mount, Fuji has X mount, Nikon has Z mount. So this side of your adapter is going to be whatever your camera is, Canon RF, Sony E. This side of the adapter is going to be whatever your vintage lens is that you are using. Now here's an example of a Sony camera with a Nikon lens, a vintage Nikon lens, and the adapter in the middle. And what you'll see is it just creates the spacing there between the lens. So if I take the lens off, you can see I've got the adapter there. I put the adapter on as if it was the lens, and then I put the lens on, and now we have our classic Nikon Nikkor lens working on our Sony camera. And I know this is where this can get a little confusing for some people because there's a lot of different vintage lens mounts out there. So I'm just going to talk about the 3 that I recommend you looking at. And in general, I recommend that you buy the adapters even before you find the lenses, because if you have the adapters, which are very, very cheap, if you go to a garage sale, if you go to a thrift shop, or if you order something on eBay, as soon as you have that lens in your hand, you can actually test it on the camera and make sure it works and it looks okay. So The 3 different lens mounts I'm going to recommend, first of all, and I'll put a bunch of links in the description down below to the actual adapters and lens mounts with a little bit of description so you don't have to memorize this. I'm going to put a lot of details in the description so that this isn't too intimidating. I should have mentioned that I've tested probably 50 or 60 different adapters to come up with the list of specific adapters that I recommend, because not all adapters are created equal. So the list below will have the very specific adapters I recommend. You will be able to find other ones that in theory do the same thing, but in my testing, they don't all perform perfectly. So these are the ones that I can recommend. The 3 that I'm going to recommend, the first one is M42 screw mount. That is what this camera is. This is a screw mount camera, and this is a screw mount lens. Screw mount lenses are probably the most plentiful lens on earth. A number of different manufacturers made them for a long period of time, and they're generally pretty easy to identify, because if you see a lens like this with a screw on it, it's probably a screw mount camera. So that is the first one I'm going to recommend. The advantage of the screw mount is that you're going to find a lot of lenses, and you're going to find a lot of cheap lenses. You are going to find some lenses that are poorer quality because they made so many of them. But if you look particularly for the Helios range of lenses, this Helios 44-2 was what was used in the Batman movie. I recommend any of the Helios M series of lenses. So if it says Helios and it's got an M on it, that means it's a multi-coat lens. I think those are a little bit better. But the screw mount is probably the most ubiquitous mount. You're going to find tons of lenses at garage sales, rummage sales, what have you. The next one I'm going to recommend is the Canon FD mount. And I've got a few Canon FD lenses here. The FD was the mount just before Canon went to the EF mount autofocus lenses. So there are a whole bunch of different ones out there. They're reasonably plentiful. People love the Canon name. The lenses hold their value well. And you can often find, if you shop around, a matched set. And I've got a matched set of FD lenses here. So I've got a 28 millimeter, 50 millimeter, and 35 millimeter. And that is a nice broad range of different focal lengths in a vintage lens that all have a very similar coating and look. And therefore, I can take these out and shoot in different situations, and I've got, a bit of a matched set. And the third one I'm going to recommend is the Nikon F mount. The lenses for that mount are generally called Nikkor lenses. This is a lens that was dropped. It's pretty beat up. I paid, I think, $40 for it, and it has taken the most famous photo of all time, and that is the Afghan girl photo, which is a photo of an Afghan girl with these sort of striking, I think they were green eyes. Really incredible photo. If you look up Afghan girl, if you haven't heard of it, but anybody from my generation is familiar with the Afghan girl photo. This is an incredible lens. I got this one that was dropped for, as I said, I think it's $43. And then I've got one around here on the table somewhere, I think, in absolute mint condition. I'm not sure what I've done with it. And that one was, I think, $90 for a mint condition one. So all the lenses that I've got here, none of them did I pay more than $100 for. And on average, I probably spent $30 or $40 per lens. Now, just looking at that Nikkor mount, I really like that because at the time Nikon was making lenses, they were the lens of professional photographers, high-end shooters, and Canon was like the brand for the consumers. Now that is kind of flipped around, and Canon is the more popular, the premium scene brand in general. But because of that, the Nikkor lenses, which if you talk to a professional photographer, most of them will have some sort of vintage Nikkor lens that they use adapted. They prefer the Nikkor lenses over the Canon lenses. So you're going to be able to often find the Nikkor lenses for even cheaper than the Canon lenses, even though at the time they were considered premium. I mean, how they compare now, I don't know by modern standards, but I do really like my Nikkor lenses. When you're out there looking for vintage lenses, regardless of what mount adapter you have selected, you're going to find a number of focal lengths that are quite common. And the two most common you're going to find is a 35 millimeter and a 50 millimeter focal length. And I think these are both great versatile focal lengths, whether using a full frame camera or a crop sensor camera. I think if you're shooting in a crop sensor camera, I would lean towards a 35 millimeter being more your first lens if you can find one. But the 50 millimeter lens is going to be a great portrait style lens. Obviously, on a full frame camera, you're going to have a little bit wider field of view. That's going to give you a little bit more versatility. But just looking at the lenses out there, 35 and 50 are the most common, and they are great starting points. Now, once we move away from those most common focal lengths, you're going to find on the wider end 28. If you can find a 28, that is great on a crop sensor or APS-C sensor camera. And on the longer end, you're going to find some 135 millimeter lenses, which are excellent on a full frame camera for headshots and portraits and really getting a blurry background. But because the prices on these lenses are often so cheap, I would just encourage you to just experiment. You find some cheap lenses, try them out. They're very low. It's a very low risk way to just sort of get creative and try some different focal lengths and get some different looks for your camera. When buying vintage lenses, there are a couple things that you really need to keep an eye out for. And the number one thing is what's called fungus. Now, fungus is where you get this sort of spider webby, crackly looking thing growing inside the lens. Now, an easy way to check for this is take your phone, the flashlight on your phone, take both lens caps and shine it through the back of the lens up and have a look at what's inside. Now, I have to warn you, if you do this with any lens, including even your modern lenses now, one that you've even just taken out of the box, you're going to see specks of dust and all kinds of stuff in there that doesn't affect image quality. And I think a lot of times if you do this with any lens, you're probably going to go, oh, I don't want to buy this lens. In this case, all we're looking for is trying to identify if we have this spider webby looking stuff growing in the lens. If there isn't a lot of it and the lens is cheap enough, I still buy those lenses. It doesn't bother me if a lens has a little fungus, but in a perfect world, you'd have one that didn't have any of that growing in it. The other thing you want to watch for is scratches on the front or back of the lens. This is a pretty obvious one. I have lenses that have a lot of micro scratches from cleaning, and those are actually absolutely fine. So just be looking for some deep gouges. In addition to that, hopefully you've gone around, if you're at a thrift shop or something like that, or garage sale, you've got your camera with you, your adapter with you, you put it on and just look through the lens and look at different scenes, have the light come from the side and see if you really notice those scratches in the image. Generally speaking, if you're a 35 or 50 millimeter lens and beyond, if it's not a wide lens, you probably won't even notice. So I wouldn't discount a scratched lens or something with little micro scratches on it if it's cheap enough, but just something to look out for. And the other thing to test is just make sure that the focus motion is nice and smooth. When you turn it, the focusing works, and that the aperture turns and clicks, and look through the lens and make sure that aperture is actually changing in the lens when you are turning the aperture. The next thing we need to talk about is the settings in the camera. And your camera is designed and it expects to have a lens that has electronic contacts on it. So the camera can talk to the lens and the lens can talk back to the camera. With these manual lenses, these vintage lenses, the camera doesn't even know that it has a lens on it. And because of that, if you don't go into the menu system and select a very specific setting, most cameras will not shoot photo or video without turning this setting on. And generally it's called operate shutter without lens or release shutter without lens. All cameras, the way it says it is a little bit different, but you just need to go and enable this camera to let it know, hey, I know what I'm doing. I know you don't want to open your shutter if you don't think there's a lens on there, but I'm putting this manual lens on. You're not going to know that there is a lens on there, but I need you to be able to still take a photo or shoot a video anyways. So you just need to enable that. The next thing is, since these are vintage lenses, they are all manual focus, manual aperture lenses. That means that to change the aperture, that the amount of light that's coming in and hitting the sensor through the lens, you change that on the lens itself by physically turning this ring. Because of that, I think it's often best, particularly for beginning photographers, to go in and set your camera to aperture priority. If you set it to aperture priority, then the camera is going to take care of your shutter speed and your ISO for you, and you are going to select the aperture here. In very simple terms, if you're trying to blur out your background and sort of create a subject isolation, then you set that aperture to the smallest number possible. If you want a very deep depth of field where kind of everything is focused, then you set it down to f5.6 or f8, and that's the stylistic realistic choice you make when taking your photo or video based on the aperture that you're using. The other thing you need to know is these lenses are all manual focus lenses. And I think this is the one thing that a lot of people are intimidated by. But fortunately, our modern mirrorless cameras have some incredible tools that really help us nail that manual focus. And once you start shooting manual focus and you use these tools, you will get so good and so fast at it that in most situations, you will not even miss autofocus. I know if you haven't got to that point yet, that sounds impossible. I swear to you, it's true. It's an absolute reality. But there are a couple of tools that we need to enable in our camera settings to make that a little bit easier for us. The two main focus tools you're going to find in any modern mirrorless camera are punch in assist and focus peaking. Now, punch in assist generally gives you a button somewhere on the camera or by tapping the screen on your camera. What it'll do is when you're composing an image, you'll hit that button or tap the screen and the camera will zoom in. It won't actually zoom in. It will just zoom in on the image. So you are seeing a part of your image magnified compared to the rest of the image. You then can nail your manual focus back out of it and you know what's in focus. This punch and assist is my favorite way to nail manual focus, and I use it all the time, and I've got buttons programmed on all my cameras specifically for it, and I find that I'm very, very quick at it. The other focus assist tool is called focus peaking, and this just gives you a highlighted or sparkling area around the part of the person or scene that is in focus. So if you're taking a picture of someone, you'll see that their hair is kind of sparkling and glowing, or if their eyelashes are in focus, you'll see some sort of sparkling outline around their eyelashes. So between these two tools, I think it's just a matter of playing with them and see which one works best for you. The other thing that I hear people say is, okay, this is fine for photographs where I've got something still, I nail focus and I push the shutter release and I take the photo. But what about video where things are moving? You will be surprised, and if you watch any Hollywood movie, and pretty much all of them are shot with manual focus because cinema lenses, high-end cinema lenses, are all manual focus. Video is even more forgiving of missing focus a little bit, and it looks even more natural if the image is a little bit out of focus in and out while you're sort of taking the image and someone's moving around. And in fact, in the movie Titanic, the end scene where they come in and, or the scene where they've got, Jack and the girl at the front of the ship doing the, iconic Titanic scene, the first 4 seconds of that camera coming in are out of focus. And I've never heard anybody except for the director actually say anything about it. And I've watched that movie multiple times, never noticed. But next time you watch Titanic, the first 4 seconds is out of focus, and I bet you really don't even notice or think about it. So nailing focus in video is super, super forgiving. And I think in that situation, I kind of like focus peaking because you don't have to punch in and you're just on the run. But you can do it even in video. Now, I cover a lot of budget-friendly manual focus new lenses on this channel. Mostly these are designed and made in China. I mean, pretty much everything's made in China now, but these are Chinese companies that are also doing the design on these, unlike the Japanese companies that are making their products in China. And I think there's a question, what's better for me? Should I adapt vintage lenses or should I buy these discounted Chinese lenses? And sometimes when I'm talking about great Chinese lenses that I've found, somebody's like, oh, I would just adapt this vintage lens and yeah, I wouldn't buy that Chinese lens. And actually, I think for most people out there, you can have both, and they give you different advantages depending on which one you're using. Now, to start with, let's talk about the vintage lenses. The advantage of the vintage lenses, first of all, just everyone is unique. They've had their own history. They've had their own life. You almost never know what you're going to get. You might find one that's dropped and beat up and just love the looks of it. So there's this real crapshoot of creativity. You never know what you're going to get, and that's kind of the fun of it. The other thing is the process of trying to find a cheap vintage lens is kind of fun. It's like a treasure hunt, whether you're going to thrift shops or searching eBay or on Facebook Marketplace. There is a real hunt involved. And you could set aside at the beginning of the month, say, oh, I've got $100. I'm going to spend it on vintage lenses. And you spend that whole month just searching. And if that's the type of thing, if you like that hunt and you like shopping, it's a super fun thing for people like that to do. The other thing is you might find an incredible bargain. You can find these Chinese lenses and they're sort of reasonably priced and they're absolutely cheap for what they are. But you might find some really famous lens for half the price of what it should be worth. So there is an ability to really get an absolute bargain, particularly at like estate sales, deceased estates, garage sales, situations where people don't actually know what they've got. And when we look at the Chinese lenses, the advantages of them are essentially that they're brand new. You're not going to have to worry about fungus. You're not going to have to worry about the aperture ring sticking. You're not going to have to worry about the focus locking up. You're going to get a brand new lens. That lens is going to come with a 30-day return window from Amazon or wherever you've bought it. And then it's also going to come with a 1-2 multi-year warranty, depending on which lens manufacturer you're buying from. So you're getting a new product and you're getting all those benefits of a new product. You also know what you're getting. You're getting what you pay for. If you've seen me take photos and review a lens, you should reasonably expect to be able to buy that lens, and your photos, your videos should look pretty much the same as what I've got, regardless of where you are in the world. Where with the vintage lenses, once again, it can be part of the fun, but you never know what you are going to get, and there can be significant variations due to the effects of time on the lens. The budget Chinese lenses also tend to be higher contrast, so they look more like a modern lens, more like your Sony or your Sigma or your Tamron lens. Also, these budget Chinese lenses come in a wider range of focal lengths, particularly for APS-C or crop sensor users. You're going to get some wider focal lengths that are either prohibitively expensive in vintage lenses or not available at all. So I think for a lot of focal lengths, there really isn't a budget alternative in a vintage lens. Once again, I'll put links in the description down below to the adapters that I recommend. It's probably the first step. If you want to go down this track of adapting vintage lenses on your modern mirrorless camera, buying the adapters so that when you find the lenses or you order the lenses from eBay, you can actually test them and make sure they work is a good idea. And I think if you picked up the three that I've recommended, the Canon FD, the Nikkor mount, and the M42 screw mount, you're going to be covered for probably the vast majority of lenses that you will find online or at any garage sale. Now, if you want to improve the quality of your photos without spending any money, I've just thrown a video on screen now. I think this is the best tutorial I have ever done on photography. And I'd be very surprised if you weren't a better photographer at the end of that video than you are right now.